Hey everyone, it's Matt here, and welcome back to another episode of Commander Adventures. This week, we've got a great game with a surprising outcome. But let's go ahead and jump straight into player introductions. First off, we have Michael, slinging spells with his Riku of Two Reflections deck. He kept Eternal Witness, Snapcaster Mage, Nature's Lore, Search for Azcanta, Breeding Pool, an Island, and a Mountain. We then have RJ setting up a sacrifice loop with Yawgmoth Thran Physician. He kept a pair of Swamps, Animate Dead, Grey Merchant of Asphodel, Black Market, Crypt of Agadeem, and Grave Pact. Then comes Randall playing Makansasapa Merieke. You know what? Then comes Randall playing No. He kept a Mage-Right Stone, Torrential Gearhulk, and a whole bunch of lands. Finally, we have Lacivita, looking to deck everyone out with Kami of the Crescent Moon. He kept a pair of islands, Arcane Denial, Jace's Erasure, Jace's Archivist, Cyclonic Rift, and Enter the Infinite. Michael starts us off. He drops a Breeding Pool tapped, and passes off. RJ drops a tapped Crypt of Agadeem, and passes as well. Randall drops a tapped Arcane Sanctum, as Lacivita decides to be the odd man out with an untapped island. Michael drops an island, and casts a Nature's Lore. He grabs a Stomping Ground, and chooses not to pay to have it enter untapped, before passing off. RJ drops a Swamp, and passes as well. Randall drops an Underground River. He casts an Azorius Signet, and passes. Lacivita drops another island. He casts his Commander Kami, and passes as well. Michael untaps, and draws 2. He drops a Mountain, and casts an Arcane Signet. He follows up with an Izzet Signet, and then taps both Signets to cast a Search for Azcanta before passing. RJ draws 2. He drops a Swamp, and casts a Nest of Scarabs before passing off. Randall untaps, and draws 2. He drops an island, and casts his Commander No, before passing as well. Lacivita untaps, and draws 2. He drops an island, and casts a Jace's Erasure, before passing. Michael untaps, and draws 2, before remembering Azcanta's trigger. Everyone lets him step it back, and he puts what would have been the top card of his library into his graveyard, before drawing his extra card from Kami. He drops a Forest, and casts a Cultivate. He uses it to bring in a Mountain tapped, and an Island to his hand. He then passes off. RJ untaps, and draws 2. He drops a Phyrexian Tower, and casts his Commander Yawgmoth. He then moves to end step, discards down, and passes off. Randall untaps, and draws 2. He drops a Mystic Gate for turn, and funnels 2 mana into a Mage-Right Stone. He then passes off. Lacivita untaps, draws 2, and has Michael mill 2 from Jace's Erasure. He drops an island, and casts a Jace's Archivist before passing turn. Michael untaps. He looks at the top card of his library with Search on his upkeep, and decides to leave it there before drawing 2. He drops an island for turn, and then funnels 5 mana into a Fireball, dealing 2 to Jace's Archivist and 1 to No. In response, Randall activates No to gain control of Yawgmoth. He then untaps her with Mage-Right Stone, and retaps her to take control of Jace's Archivist, before I step in to mention that Yawgmoth has protection from humans. They step game state back, and Randall gains control of Kami instead. Fireball resolves through, and No and the Archivist both die. Then No's death causes Kami to die, and Michael passes off. RJ drops a Swamp. He casts a Grave Pact and follows it up with a Death Greeter before passing off. Randall drops a Plains. He casts an Athreos Shroud Veiled and puts a coin counter on the Death Greeter at his end step. Lacivita untaps and mills RJ after his draw. He drops an island and then casts an Extraplanar Lens. As he exiles a basic under Extraplanar Lens, all snow-covered islands now tap for 2 mana instead of 1. He then passes off. Michael untaps. Search triggers on his upkeep, and he mills his 7th card. Search for his Kanta, then flips into his Kanta the Sunken Ruin. Michael drops a Rootbound Crag, and casts his commander, Riku. Before it even has a chance to hit the table, Lacivita responds with an Arcane Denial. Michael then casts a Manifold Insight, revealing these 10 cards. RJ gives him a Felwar Stone, Randall gives him Steve, and Lacivita gives him Unexpected Results, before Michael puts the rest of the cards on the bottom of his library. He casts the Felwar Stone, and follows it up with Steve, before passing off. RJ drops a Command Tower, and then casts a Vindictive Vampire. He follows up with an Animate Dead, targeting Gary in his graveyard. With that on the stack, both Lacivita and Michael remember to draw their cards from Arcane Denial. Grey Merchant then returns to the battlefield, and drains each of RJ's opponents for 11, while he gains 33 life. He then pays in a life, and sacrifices Gary to activate Yawgmoth targeting the vampire. Grave Pact triggers, and in response Michael sacrifices Steve to go and grab a tapped forest. As RJ draws a card, before putting a neg1 counter onto Vindictive Vampire. This counter being placed also triggers Nest of Scarabs, and RJ creates a 1/1 insect before passing turn. Randall drops a Caves of Quelos, and RJ remembers his triggers from both the Vampire and Death Greeter. Randall passes off, and puts a coin counter onto Vindictive Vampire at end step. Lacivita untaps, and mills Randall with his draw. He then floats 6 mana, and spends 3 of it on a Frantic Search. He draws 2, discards 2, and untaps 3 lands, before missing his mill triggers from Jace's Erasure. He casts the Sphinx's Tutelage, and follows it up with an island. He discards down at end step, and passes off. Michael untaps. He drops a forest, and casts a Fact or Fiction, targeting Randall. He reveals these 5 cards, and Randall gives him the easiest choice ever for his piles. Michael decides against taking no cards, and takes all 5 to hand. He evokes a Mole Drifter, and draws 2 more. He then casts a Kadama's Reach, bringing in a tapped island and a mountain to hand. He spends 2 life and 3 mana to cast a Phyrexian Metamorph. He has it enter as a copy of Extraplanar Lens, and exiles an island with its ETB, as he slides in a green screen token to ease the change. He moves to end step, and Lacivita makes all of that effort with the green screen for naught, with an overloaded Cyclonic Rift. In response, Michael casts a Chain of Vapor to bounce Extraplanar Lens back to Lacivita's hand. In response to that, Lacivita mana drains the Chain of Vapor. The stack resolves through, and all non-land permanents are bounced to hand. RJ drops a Bojuka Bog, and targets Lacivita with its ETB. Lacivita's graveyard is then exiled, as RJ remembers Bojuka Bog enters tapped. He casts a Black Market, and discards down before passing. Randall drops a Plains, and recasts No. He also recasts Azorius Signet, and discards down at end step. Lacivita untaps. He then mills Michael for 1 with Erasure, and RJ for 2 with Tutelage. He casts a Howling Mine, before recasting Kami and passing off. Michael untaps, and remembers he had to bounce his artifacts. He re-cleans up from his last turn, and then draws his 3 for turn. He recasts Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, and Izzet Signet, and then passes off. RJ untaps, and draws 3. He drops a Swamp, and casts Sengir Autocrat. As the Autocrat enters, RJ creates 3 0/1 Surf tokens. He then casts a Victimize, sacrificing a Surf, and returning Plaguecrafter and Gary. The Surf dying also puts a counter on the black market. Plaguecrafter and Gary both enter tapped, and everyone loses 6 as RJ gains 18. Then everyone sacrifices a creature to Plaguecrafter, and No, Kami, and a Surf all die, as Michael discards a card. All these creatures dying only put a single counter onto black market, since both No and Kami went to their respective command zones. RJ then recasts Death Greeter and passes off. Randall untaps, and draws 2. He casts an Ocean Rain, surveilling a card to his graveyard, and drawing 2 before losing 2 life. He then loses an additional 2 life to shock in a Hallowed Fountain. He recasts Athreos, and moves to end step, discarding down, and putting a counter onto Gary. Lacivita untaps, and draws 2. He targets Michael and Lacivita with an Erasure each, and RJ with both Tutelages. Both whiff, and then Lacivita moves to his turn. He drops an island, and then casts an Enter the Infinite. With Erasure and Tutelage in play, he would probably have enough to mill everyone out, if Michael didn't respond with an overloaded Cyclonic Rift. Enter the Infinite then resolves, and Lacivita draws his deck before putting a card back. And before Lacivita leaves main 1, Michael uses the blue mana he has floating to cast a Brainstorm. He draws 3, and puts 2 back, and then we move to his turn. Michael untaps. He casts an Intuition and chooses RJ before revealing a Mana Severance, a Rude Awakening, and a Windfall. RJ gives him the Mana Severance, and then Michael casts a Snapcaster Mage, targeting Windfall. He flashes it back, as everyone simultaneously loses by decking themselves, and the game ends in a draw.